Yeah.
by what they've read and seen since, describing essentially what they remember.
Yeah.
It's just a nice part of the world. It really is. Yeah.
Everybody's so helpful.
Hang on now. Let's see how our Tinker Toys are all put together here. Have we got any kind of an audio level?
Yeah, if you just want to give me a little bit of...
Glenn, would you just say a couple things? Okay, first of all, the phone was ringing, right?
Okay, the way I became involved in this was started out in the early afternoon, around probably 1:30 in the afternoon, and I received a telephone call from the mortuary officer out at the Walker Air Force Base, Army Airfield Base, and he was inquiring about what would be the smallest possible casket that we could get that would be hermetically sealed. And at that time, I know that we had used like the 4 feet and caskets. We had used those before, but I thought they also made them in a 3/6. So, but he wanted to know if we had any in stock, and I said no, but if I can make a call to Amarillo, I can have him in, by 7 o'clock the next morning on a truck. So he said, I'll get back to you. And that was the first contact that I had with the base.
And then what?
Then he called back, probably 45 minutes or so later. And he said, I need to ask you some more questions. He said, in case something like this should happen, he said, we need to know what the preparation, what your preparations are for the bodies that had been laying out in the elements, And he said, we need to know also what if your treatments of the bodies are the remains, what could you do to them, and if your treatments, would it change any of the chemical breakdown of the tissues, the blood? Would it make a difference? And I said, I thought probably it would. And I said, of course, he knew exactly how we would treat those bodies because we have an outline from them and what we really have to do. I think he already at that point knew exactly what we would have to do.
Did he disclose to you what he had?
No, I told him. I said, if you have a problem, if you want, if you have something you don't really know what to do about it, let me come out, and I'll, try to help you do whatever you want to do. And he said. And he said, no, he said...
let's just back up just a minute there. Let's start again with, you were saying you told him that you can come out and take care of what he had, right?
Yeah.
Why don't you pick it up from that point again?
So, anyway, he said, well, we don't really have anything. He said, we're sitting here thinking in case we should get involved in something like this, what would be our preparation, should we do? Then I went through... I said, do you really want to know how we would do it? Well, yes, we would like to know. So that's when I explained to him that we would have the vats that we would fill up with formaldehyde solution with water, and we put the bodies in them, let them stay there for 24 hours, and then take them out. And then we would pack the bodies in, would be a sawdust and really a lime, what we would pack them in, then wrap them in the plastic. That's bodies that were badly decomposed. If there was tissue, deep tissue, we would have to do it hypodermically with needles to get to the deep tissue. Then we would have to aspirate the cavities if the cavities hadn't already ruptured, and then put some cavity fluid in those. I said that's, kind of normal procedure.
Now, at one point, you finally offered to take care of it for them.
Well, I offered 2-3 times, yeah.
Can you review what that conversation at that point?
You mean when I offered to take care of them?
Yeah.
He said, well, we don't really, right at this time, we don't really need your assistance. But he said, in case something like this should happen, then he said we would be prepared and we would know what to do. Then we got back onto the subject of maybe not damaging any of the chemicals, compounds or anything with the bodies, or tissues, whatever, because and they wanted, how would you pick bodies up like that, and what would you do not to contaminate any of it?
Didn't this begin to seem a little strange to you at that point?
Well, I thought maybe what happened, they might have had a VIP or some officer and something that happened. They didn't want wanted to keep it quiet, and they probably wanted to do it themselves, and not be involved with the civilian businesses or anything.
So, after these conversations, you were curious, and you went on out to the base, as I understand it. Can you review that?
Well, no, I didn't go out to the base. Yeah, I was curious, but I didn't go out to the base, and probably a couple hours later, then I'd got an emergency call. There was an airman that was injured in an accident. And I took the airman to the base. He rode in the ambulance with me, and I took him out to the emergency room. And that's the way I became really involved out at the base. I didn't go out just because I was curious.
Give me the sequence from the time you picked up the airman and just describe to me.
Well, when I got the call, I left the funeral home, and the ambulance went to the scene of the accident, picked the airman up. I did not place him on a stretcher because he had a head injury in the nose. I think his nose was fractured. So I did some minor first aid, and then he sat in the front seat with me all the way to the base. When we got to the base, then he walked into the emergency room. I didn't have to take him in. They didn't bring out a gurney or anything. He just walked in on his own. Then I never did see him after that. Then I had this friend that I wanted to talk to and see. This is a lieutenant nurse that I knew quite well, that had only been there only been commissioned and been out to sign. This was her first assignment out to the air base. And I wanted to talk to her, and so I was going down the hall, and first thing, the lieutenant that I wanted to see was coming out of one room, going across the hall to the other. And she noticed it was me. She said, "How did you get in here, and what are you doing in here?" And she said, "You better get out in a hurry." She said, "You're going to get in a lot of trouble." She said, "Would you please leave and get out of here in a hurry?" And then I turned around, and she went on into the other room. Then in about the time I turned around, there was another officer said, "Hey, wait a minute." And I said, "Looks like you had a crash." He said, "I see there's some, in the ambulances out there, I see a lot of wreckage." And I said, "Where was the crash?" And he said, "There wasn't any crash." And he said, "Just wait a minute." And then he said, "Wait a minute." And I, stood there for a minute. And he turned around, and evidently he must have waited for somebody else to come out, because there was another officer coming out. He said, "This man says there was a crash out at the base." He said he wanted to know he was inquiring about our crash. And this was when I encountered, he was a red-headed officer, and very nasty, very rough. He said, "You did not see any crash. There was not any crash." And he said, "You get the hell out of here, and you didn't see anything, and you don't talk to anybody." He said, "You're going to get in a hell of a lot of trouble." And I said, "Look, I'm a civilian. There isn't a damn thing you can do to me about it." He said, "No, but somebody might be picking your bones out of the sand." That's when he made the remark there. Then there was a black sergeant that was standing beside him, and he said, "Yeah, but he would make better dog food for our dogs." Of course, I didn't understand that, but my father happened to be an old trapper and for a hobby and everything. And I said, "My father uses guys like you for bait in these coyote traps." And then there was two MPs that joined me right on, took me outside, and each holding me by my elbows, and they escorted me out back to the ambulance and followed me all the way back to the funeral home.
Now, as you were entering the hospital, you saw something in 3 trucks.
Yeah, because usually where I parked, there was 3 field ambulances parked in the area where I usually park, where we back up to the ramps. So I just pulled up to the side in front of those and parked out in the front, and the airman and I got out and walked in. So when I got up, went up the steps and up the ramp, and I was walking, going into the emergency room, I noticed that the doors were open, but what was odd about it, there was an MP standing beside each one of the vehicles in the back, just standing there. And the doors were open. Naturally, I was curious, and, I just happened to look in. That's when I saw some debris that looked like parts of a plane or something that they hadn't had a crash. Because I've seen them do this a lot of times, bring in pieces in the old ambulances in.
Can you describe the debris?
Yeah, I noticed in 2 of the ambulances there was some debris that was probably 2.5 to 3 feet, long and probably high, that was propped up on the side of the ambulance there. They were kind of in the shape of maybe like a half a canoe. They were like the front part of a canoe. And, it looked like it might be aluminum, but it looked more like the metal looked more like stainless steel that had been heated. It was blue, kind of a bluish tint to it. But what was odd about it, it looked like around the curved part in the front of the canoe, there was some designs or something that kind of reminded me of maybe some Egyptian signs or whatever. And it was probably about 3 inches in high, and probably the length of what the wreckage I saw, it looked like it was the length. And the same thing was in the other ambulance too. I mean, I saw practically the same thing. The pieces that were practically the same size, and the insignias looked like whatever that might be was part of the wreckage.
How did your friend feel about what she saw?
Well, I didn't know really until the next day. And I called out. I kept trying to get a hold of her because naturally I was curious and I wanted to know what was going on. And so I called out the next day, and then probably around 11:30, she said, "I know you've been trying to get a hold of me, but I haven't been available." And she said, "Why don't you meet me at the officers club? If you have time, meet at the officers club, and we'll have lunch. And I want to talk to you." And the funeral home we had at that time, we had some of the businesses there had an associate membership to the officers club, and our funeral home had that membership, and also had a card to identify myself and what business that I was, associated with. So I had no problem. One time I'd go to base, all I had to do, a lot of times if it was in the evening, I'd have to stop and sign a visitor's and get a visitor's pass and then turn it in when I left. But it was no problem going out there. So I went on out and met her. Beg your pardon?
Tell me about lunch.
Well, we, both ordered. I'm not sure, remember what we ordered, but it was just a light lunch. But she was so upset. She looked like she's, in shock, is what she really talked like and looked like. And she said, I said, well, I was just curious. The only reason I want to talk to you, I was curious on what happened. And she said, well, you won't believe it. And she says, I don't believe it either. But she said, I got in a lot of trouble on this thing. I'm not real sure about this. But she said, then she pulled out of a little purse or little pocketbook, whatever she had there. She gave me a little diagram that she had drawn some figures of some arms and face and so on. She told me that this is what was in those, that it was a crash. It wasn't an airplane, but they didn't know what it was at that time.
These were bodies.
Yeah, but she said we have 3 bodies. That there was 3 bodies. She said 2 of them were very mutilated. One looked like it might have walked out, or that it, might have lived a little while. and she explained they were like 3.5 feet to 4 feet tall. The two of the bodies were the you couldn't identify much because they were practically destroyed, and it looked like maybe that they might have been a predatory animal or something might have been doing some damage on the bodies too.
How did she describe their head and their hands?
Well, she said the head, and then the little drawings that I had, the way she explained it and the way she drew it, that the heads were somewhat larger than a human heads. The hands were long, no thumbs. It was just the long, very delicate fingers at the end of on the underside at the tip of each fingers was a pad-like, maybe a little pad, but it looked like the skin had maybe little suction, like the little suction cups on those. On the no fingernails on the hands. The head, the lips were just a long, narrow, more or less, not full lips like we would have in most of our people, but very fine lined, very fine lips. There was no teeth. That was the inside of the mouth. It was kind of like a real a gums. Maybe it was. She said to explain it. It was almost as hard as if it was rawhide. Maybe, at that. The ears. There was only 2 small orifices on each side of the head with looked like a couple of small lobes that might, some way that might cover both of those. But there was not a protruding ear. And also that the nose, there was only 2 small orifices in the nose. There was really no nose that was convex. It was all just flush with the face.
Was she emotional about all this?
Very much so. Very emotional. She would have to stop and drink water every once in a while, and also she never touched a meal. All the time we were talking in an hour and a half that we were there, she never touched her meal.
Any other demonstrations of emotion? Indications of how she was upset?
Well, just, every once in a while she'd go like this, and wringing her hands, and she said it was the most I've never been so horrified in my life. I've never seen anything so gruesome in my life. I've never smelt anything that smelt worse in my life. And she told me that when I saw her, she was leaving the room to go to the bathroom because she was deathly ill and was going to throw up.
Did she recognize any of the doctors by examining the body?
She told me, she said, I asked her that question, which of the doctors, and she said, I don't know that I knew them, and that was her answer. So, but she said she walked in the room and they said, hey, we need you, you need to help us. And that was the way she became involved in it. And then she got ill. The doctors also became very ill. They would have to do a little examination, then they'd have to leave and go sit down, and then they would come back and do a little bit more. It was that bad.
After your conversation with her at lunch, can you describe what happened next? How you were unable to see her again, and how you learned the...
Well, yeah, we'd visited a while, and then I had to get back to the funeral home, go back to work, but then I never did see her after that. And I called out the next day to see how she was feeling, and they told me that she wasn't available. Then I wouldn't be available that day. I called the next day, and they told me that she'd been transferred. And it was rather odd because she'd only been at the base less than 3 months. That was her on commission less than 3 months, and that was her first assignment. So it was rather odd that she would be transferred out, within 3 months. So
later on, you attempted to, I guess you got a letter.
Then about 2 weeks, probably 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks. Could have been a little longer, but I know it was at least 2 weeks. I got a letter addressed to me at Glendennis at the Ballard Funeral Home. With she didn't sign. It didn't have any returned address or anything on it. But inside of the letter, It was just a note. She said, I don't have time to write. I will write later. This is my APO number. And that was the extent of it. So then I wrote back to her and asked her more or less how she was feeling and why the sudden transfer, and then I hoped that she wasn't in any trouble. It was just a short note. I really didn't go into a lot of detail or anything. Then probably 3 weeks or probably a month after that, then I got the letter that I had mailed to her. It was returned. It was stamped return, and also it's in red printing it said deceased, and that's the last time I ever heard anything about it. Then, then I went out to the base a few days later, and I was talking to one of the nurses, and I said, whatever happened to the lieutenant? And she said, well, the rumor is that we heard that she was killed with 5 other nurses in a training mission in a plane crash. And that was it.
No indication of where?
Well, it was in London, England. She said in the note that she sent me that she was in London, stationed in London. And that was it. That's the last time I ever heard.
Do you believe that she's dead?
No, I don't think so. After all that's happening and after, threatening me and everything, I doubt very seriously that she was. I would hope not.
What would you like to say to her if she happened to see this?
Well, if she happened to just see it, if she feels like if she wants to talk, if she feels like I would like to hear from her, yes. See what's been going on in her life and why she wasn't able to contact me. If she, feels like it.
Let's stop tape for a minute. Okay. Now, the sheriff told your father you were in trouble.
Okay, what happened there? Then the next day after I was there, when I had the problem with the officer and the black man, I was told my father was contacted by our sheriff, George Wilcox, which was a very close friend of my father's. They were very good friends. And he called to see if my father was home because he wanted to come out and talk to my father. And he did so, and he told my father that there was a black sergeant from the base that came to his office, was inquiring about who my parents were, my mother and my father, if I had any brothers or sisters, and all, wanting to know what my personal family, who they were and where they were. George said that he knew I had some family, but he didn't know, where they were or anything else. So anyway, he told my father that he did contact my father, and he told my father that he thought I might be in some trouble. And but they evidently didn't explain why I was in trouble. So, first thing my father did was get in his car and come to the funeral home. He said we had to talk because he and I were very close. We were real good friends. The best friend I ever had was my father. He said, I've got to talk. He said, if you're in trouble, he said, we've got to do something about it. And I said, I'm not in trouble. He said, well, you are. He said, George Wilcox told me that you were in a lot of trouble and that you got involved in something that you had no business getting involved in and that you could be in a lot of trouble. And I said, so I told my father the story, and he's the only man that I've ever told this story to until I talked to Stan Friedman and to you people, and that's it, period. And I did tell my father what the story was. Of course, it was unbelievable for him. But then he became very upset, and he wanted to go shoot a few people and all that because they did threaten my life, and so that was the way my father heard about it, and that was the extent of my family. And he never would tell him who my brother, and I had a brother that was a fighter pilot during that time, and I had 3 sisters, and one of them was a nurse. But he would never tell him anything, and so he didn't tell the sheriff or anybody else, because the sheriff was supposed to call him back and give him the names and where they were at, and he wouldn't do it.
Let's get back to your friend. Did she express an opinion as to what she thought these beings were? Did she think they came with it?
Well,
She
the only remark that she ever made was that they definitely weren't humans as we know humans, but they could be from another planet. Or the doctors were explaining this, that they couldn't be from our planet. They had to be an alien, or had to be something else, but not in our planet.
She had a phrase she used to describe how they looked to her. You remember that? You were telling me, like little black Chinamen.
Well, she said that, well, of course they were, first thing she said, they were black. They were just as black as they could be, but probably laying out in the elements in July in Roswell with 105 to 110 temperature every day and 80 degrees or so at night. I mean, that wouldn't be uncommon, because we picked up a lot of sheep herders of people that have been found dead that's laying in the desert, for days and bitten by rattlesnakes or whatever. And they do turn, as black as they can. And I know exactly what they were talking about, because, with the smell and the odor being so drastic, because this is a very unpleasant situation, And
let's talk about their eyes. How did she describe their eyes?
Well, she said that, of course, their eyes were set back into the skull. Oh, and it was I thought it was interesting also that she said their skulls, the doctor said their skull bone structure wasn't like ours. It wasn't actually a bone. It was probably a real heavy cartilage. It looked more or less like a newborn baby. The skull was very pliable. You could mash on the skull and it would, it would give. And so the bone structure, bones not like our bones, it was our skull and everything.
What about the bones in the hands and arms?
Said very fine, very delicate. The arm bones, like the radial and the ulnar and in the arm, that was so fine that he doubted if they could lift. She said they doubt if anyone at that size and the arms at that could lift 50 pounds on the earth or anywhere else. They doubted they had that strength. But she said the one that hadn't been mutilated to a great extent, it reminded him of a real small ancient Chinese person, no hair at all, and very, very delicate skin. In fact, he said the skin would look like they could almost see through it, almost transparent.
Why don't you give me a paragraph on the ears and the nostrils?
Well, the ears, like I think I stated to you, that the ears, there was a couple of small orifices, one on top of the other, with two little lobe flaps, one over the other. They didn't really know if they had any significance, how they worked or what. They didn't go into that. The nose was only a couple of very small orifices, holes right there, just above the lip line. But it had, there wasn't anything covering it. And it was just like two small indentations there, and that was it. Said it was very unusual.
Does anyone else, Don, Kel, do you have anything that you think
You're
we
talking
should
about
add?
the hands. The hands.
Yeah.
Describe the hands.
The hands, well, there was one hand. There was one hand that evidently wasn't attached to the arm. And she said that where she got sick and left the room was that this doctor had the long forceps and picked the hand up and turned it over. And that's when they noticed that there wasn't any thumb. None of the bodies had any thumbs or anything. They were just long, very fine, very delicate fingers, no fingernails. But right at the tip of each finger, it looked like there was a pad. And in this pad, it looked like it might have had very small they were like little suction cups, very minute suction cups. The doctors, that's the way he explained it, that was looking at it.
Let's have tapes right now. Okay.
We need to get the arm as well.
Okay, yes, the
Which
arm.
goes with that.
We need to go about the arm.
Really?
In the magazine we publish, and with the pads at the tips of the fingers.
Maybe you can get it. Can you get a copy of them?
I can send you a copy, I'd be happy to.
It's amazing.
It all fits together. That's the
And they
thing.
would
It
not
just
have
fits
known
together.
about
Obviously, they wouldn't know about your information.
Yeah, well, see, I've never
vice versa.
I've never discussed this with anyone. My father was the only person I really ever discussed this. I didn't discuss it at the funeral home or anything else. I never discussed it with any of my family, period. I never have until I met Stan Freeman 2 years ago. It's the first time I ever discussed it.
Would you have an interest in some dubs of testimony that we get from other people here? I'd be happy to.
Oh, I'd
send you
love
tape.
to, yeah, but I'd love to. I'd like to have a tape of mine also, if you,
Sure,
don't,
absolutely. Of course
you
we can
know.
do that.
Maybe we can send you two, one for each hand. Or
My,
something.
my daughter said if, I want a tape of this and I want to keep it, and I want it in the family, but.
We'll make you up.
Yeah, I would love to, whatever, if you guys feel comfortable, I'd love to, have some tapes of whatever,
Absolutely.
I
We've
would.
got quite a few that we could probably run off. What you have VHS or Beta machine? Tape?
I'll see to that we get some dubs of other people's interviews.
I just go to Kmart or wherever and buy the.
I think we have the tape going now. Why don't we start with the thing? How they
Well,
request.
he talked about the hand, so for continuity, it might be good to go to the
Oh,
arms.
this will all be edited anyway, but we can start wherever you like. You want to go with that? Let's start with the arms, okay?
Anytime.
Oh, forget the camera.
Seeing if he was ready.
It's not there.
Yeah,
It's not there.
that's all right.
But you were asking me to describe the arms, and this was another thing that the lieutenant brought out, that it was very the difference between theirs and ours, that from the wrist to the first joint here, that it was probably 1.5 times longer than the top part up here. It was very odd looking. It was very odd, she said. And the very small arms, very small.
Bone structure?
Bone structure. Of course, I asked her about the bones because we were talking about the wrist bones and everything, and she said it was very similar to ours, but the bones were so small that their bones probably wasn't in the arm wasn't any larger than my finger.
Wow.
So
Heavens. Okay, now give me 2 or 3 sentences on how they were dressed. If they were dressed.
we never mentioned it,
Is that-
never talked about the dress.
Did she say anything about sex, or was she able to determine?
She said she really never. She was so sick and everything that never even entered her mind. So that was it.
I guess not.
No way to determine the sex of the beings then.
Well, it wasn't discussed with her. It probably was, but she, like she said, I was so ill and so horrified that I don't. She said she sat up all night and she knew I was going to be real concerned. Knew I was going to be on what happened. She knew that I got in trouble probably, and she drew that. She sat up and made little notes on the back of these little prescription pads. And that's what she had her notes made out, and that's what we discussed, particularly what she had.
I was very interested in that you had kept so many records of the incident and pertaining to everything that you knew regarding the UFO correction. And you kept them in the, there at Ballard's, and then later they disappeared. Yeah. Could you give us a
Well,
sense of that?
I was really in charge of all the military contracts. I did all the bids and everything and really took care of all the contracts myself. And that was one of my duties at the funeral home, to take care of the military. And I had a file on everything that ever happened at Walker Air Base, like Bob Hope and some of the big orchestras, and everybody'd come and have the big parties and everything in the hangars. I attended, but I would also have pictures and everything. I had a personal file that I kept, and I kept everything in this file that pertained that I attended or whatever. And this is where I put the diagrams and the notes that she gave me was in my personal file. Well, then the Ballard Funeral Home sold at a later date, several years later, that it sold. And the people that bought the funeral home, these were files they were the old files that they kept in the basement down in the furnace room. And they had I had all the military files together in one filing cabinet. Everything had happened at the base and everything. We also had the contract at Fort Sumner Air Base. They had a glider base there and also fighter pilot training there, and the P-47s and 51s and so on. And so I had all the files. Everything was, one filing cabinet was strictly all military. And that's where I had all this filed away. I had all this filed away. I even had the newspaper that Walter Haut, the headlines and all this, the next day I had all that in his files.
What interests me is that out of all these files,
Yeah.
all these different topics, only one was missing when you went to look for it, and that was the one pertaining to this.
Yeah.
Can you review that for us?
Well, no, there were some of the other files were missing also, not just my own file, but my file was in the same, that, yeah, most all of my file was gone. But there was also some files, they had really actually had destroyed most of the files that were pertaining after certain years. They just gotten rid of them. And they told the manager of the funeral home, that's the manager there named Raymond Otero, also told me that he knew my file was there. Joe Lucas, that was the manager at that time, knew my files were there. And he and I'd had some personal problems, and he said, get rid of his damn files. We don't want anything that remind us of him. And that's where the files went, really.
There was some discussion about how to preserve the bodies,
Right.
dry ice and that sort of thing, and you kind of addressed
Oh, well,
where they got the ice and things.
Then the mortuary officer, what would you do if you had to ship one out? And but you couldn't do anything to it. I mean, that you couldn't, do any treatments. I mean, what would you do? I said the only thing you could do that I would suggest, that first thing, if you have a problem, don't want to destroy any of the tissue, any blood cells, anything that you don't want to destroy, I would suggest that you contact a pathologist. And I said, I'm sure the Army Airfield, somebody's got some pathologists around. I didn't know that they had one in Roswell, but I said, if I were you, I'd call a pathologist and ask him how he would like to have it done, or whatever you're going to do, or whatever it is. You better do what the pathologist, because he's the one that's going to do the autopsy and make the reports. But I said, the only thing I know you could do is just go to Clarity's Dairy or Sunset Creamery, we had two at the time, and buy all the dry ice you can and pack them in dry ice, if that's possible. And that's what I suggest that they do.
Excuse me, Glenn, you're hitting my mic with your
Oh,
thumb.
sorry about that.
It's all right. I've done it at least 8 times
I
already
know it's
this
not
week.
personal like this.
No.
Okay, what do you think?
I think as a suggestion, you might want to do that part again if you think you'd like to use it, because
The dry ice?
you probably hit it just a few times. And it might
Oh, sorry about that.
Isn't this picky business?
Glenn Dennis, take 2, Clarity's
Yeah.
Dairy.
All right, let's go back and go over the dry ice then again.
Well, okay. What I suggested that to the mortuary officer, I suggested this to the mortuary officer and we discussed this probably for 20 minutes or better on the telephone. And I kept telling him, hey, if you have a problem, if you got something out there, if you need our services, we have the contract. I would be glad to come out and help you take care of it. And he said, no, this is for future. Kept always referring this was for future use in case we did have something. But then I said, well, first thing you better do, you better get a hold of a pathologist. I don't know whether you have one at the base, but I know you probably have the top pathologist, something similar to those words. And I said, that's what I do, and you better let him give you the instructions, and then you better do what he tells you to do, because he's the one that's going to do the autopsy. And if it's this sensitive, you better do what he tells you. But I said, the only other suggestion I can make, that you go to Clarity's Dairy or you go to Sunset Creamery, buy all the dry ice you can and pack whatever you have, whatever the problem is, you better pack it in dry ice and then do whatever you have to do with it, because that's the only way. They tried to put it in the morgue. Out at the morgue, they had 2 refrigerated body compartments that we used to put them in, and then we would go out and get the bodies from there. But they always brought the airmen to us, but on the dependents and everything, we went out for them. but they weren't cold enough, and it became so offensive. They were afraid they were going to upset everybody in the hospital. So they later moved them over to a hangar, and that's the last that she knew anything about them too. The lieutenant knew anything about them, but she didn't know how they moved it or anything about it. But they were taken to a hangar because the odor was so offensive they couldn't. That, like they said, it was upsetting everything.
That's great.
So,
Fantastic.
Did she ever tell you where she thought or where she was told the bodies went from Roswell?
I'm sorry.
Where the bodies went from Roswell?
Did you know where they were shipped out? Did you know where they went?
She didn't know.
You never,
She never told me. She never mentioned any.
never suggested them.
No suggestion whatsoever. She just said that the last she heard they were in a hangar, and that's all she knows. And we never discussed anything else.
I guess if that takes care of everything, would you like to watch it?
What is a portion of it, just to get an idea? You don't need to watch the whole.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's turn it around and watch it.
Do you